Today on History's Tech, we are looking at the North American F-100 Super Sabre, the first United States Air Force fighter craft that was capable of traveling at supersonic speeds at leveled flight. Now, while the F-100 was not the first aircraft to break the sound barrier, it was the first production fighter aircraft for the United States Air Force that was capable of achieving faster than the sound barrier flight. But let's go ahead and look at the development of the F-100 Super Sabre. The F-100 was envisioned as the high-performance successor to the F-86 Sabre. Initially called the Sabre 45 for its 45-degree swept wings, it was proposed to the United States government unsolicited, so there wasn't even a request for this aircraft, but North American went ahead and presented it to the United States government. The design was actually liked by the United States Air Force, and a mock-up of the aircraft was presented to the United States Air Force for inspection. And after they were given a list of more than 100 things to modify the aircraft, and North American made these modifications, the aircraft was actually accepted by the United States Air Force, and the first two production aircraft, the prototypes, rolled out in '52. With over 250 aircraft ordered before the first YP-100 took off, there was actually high expectations for this aircraft. Now, during the test flights of the YF-100 prototypes, the aircraft actually managed to achieve Mach 1 at leveled flight, the first time any jet production aircraft had ever done this. Despite this, the aircraft did have several design flaws that were discovered during the testing before they could actually begin production of the aircraft. And once these were fixed, by the time this happened, the Korean War was going on, and there ended up being a strike at North American development facilities, and they ended up slowing down the production of the aircraft for several years. Now, the F-100 would be finally pushed out to Air Force units in 1954 with the 479th Fighter Wing at George Air Force Base in California. But less than a year later, the entire fleet would be grounded after 6 major accidents due to a combination of factors including flight instability, structural failure, and hydraulic failures. And that could have honestly been the end of the career of the F-100, because the Air Force opted to start phasing out the F-100A and start giving it to Air National Guard unit and to Allied Air Forces. However, due to the growing tension in Europe over the building of the Berlin Wall, the F-100As were called back into active service. However, all the work they did into trying to get them into service really didn't work out, and they ended up prematurely retiring the aircraft early and instead going with a new variant, the F-100C. The 100C was seen as more of an interim solution to problems of the F-100A, and while it wasn't seen as a fighter aircraft, it was seen as a perfect aircraft for nuclear toss bombing. If you've never heard the concept of nuclear toss bombing, this is an idea, and there were variations on it, but it was the idea to maximize the survivability of the pilot and the aircraft by essentially lobbing a nuclear bomb at a target instead of just dropping it right on top of it. The last major production variant to be produced was the F-100D model. Like the aircraft before it, it was problematic. However, the aircrews had figured out enough to actually go in and individually make modifications to the D model aircraft to make them serviceable aircraft. With all of these problems, the aircraft would actually be deployed to multiple events. It would take place during the Cuban Missile Crisis, where they were deployed to Homestead Air Force Base as a deterrent from a possible Cuban strike. They were deployed during the Vietnam War, where we would see significant upgrades to the aircraft to improve its sustainability and service of life. And it is during the Vietnam War that this aircraft would actually see the largest amount of usage in its entire career. It served the role as an escort aircraft for aircraft such as the F-105 Thunder Chiefs. It would serve a close air support mission role, and would even take part in the Wild Weasel air defense suppression systems. If you're unfamiliar with Wild Weasel, that was a strategic maneuver in which you would bait enemy SAM sites to fire at you to give away their location so that they could be targeted and destroyed. While the F-100 finally did find a role in the military, it was short-lived, because by 1972 the United States Air Force had begun phasing out the F-100 Super Sabre in favor of the F-4 Phantom. But this would not be the end of the role for the F-100. It would go on to serve with multiple nations, including the French Air Force in the Algerian Wars. with Turkey during the Turkish invasion of Cyprus, and would serve with Turkey until 1982, being the last country to deploy a Super Sabre in service. Sadly, due to the constant issues the aircraft had and the fact that more and more newly developed aircrafts were being put into service, the F-100 didn't have as long as a career as some other jet fighters of the era. Now, I do want to take a moment to look at some of the rather unique variants and projects that the F-100 Super Sabre was a part of. As part of the development of Project Slick Chick, 6 F-100As were converted to RF-100As as reconnaissance aircraft. All armament was removed, and instead a series of cameras were placed inside the aircraft. And while multiple attempts were made to intercept these aircraft while they were spying over enemy bases, none were ever intercepted, and the only reason the aircraft was removed from service is it was replaced by the U-2. Also, the F-100D was one of several aircraft selected for the Zero-Length Launch System, which was a program designed to launch aircraft with rocket engines attached to them to eliminate the need for runways in areas where building a runway was not practical. More than 200 F-100Ds were converted to QF-100Ds. These were an unmanned radio-controlled variant that was used to test new missiles. Now, the most interesting variant is known as the North American F-107. This aircraft initially started off as the F-100B variant of the F-100 Super Sabre. However, due to all the variations on the aircraft and the engineering feats on the aircraft, it received its own unique, distinct designation. Only 3 prototypes were ever built, and the aircraft was actually passed over in favor of the F-105 Thunder Chief. However, 2 of them would spend the remainder of their careers as testbed aircraft. Now, in terms of legacy, there's more than a couple of dozen of them on display outside the United States, with close to 100 on display within the United States. There are even a few airworthy airframes available right now, including one just down the road from me at Ellington Airfield. However, one of the most important legacies the F-100 had is that it was part of the United States Air Force's air demonstration team, the Thunderbirds. But there you have it, a look at the F-100 Super Sabre, an aircraft that was honestly plagued by a lot of development issues and could have been canceled. However, the aircraft was given a second chance and continued to serve in multiple variations and iterations throughout history up until the 1980s. But there you have it. I thank you for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you on the next time.